Gentlemen, we have a second fireside chat. Come on up. And I promise you this is going to be a good one. All right, so let me start with this. During the first one, I told you I had no notes, and I just set my notepad down. Not this time. Because this, we have a lot to say. Sara has a lot to say. So as we were just talking about, just prayed about, you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do this. You flip this right here for you. There you go. Push that up.
Can you guys hear me?
There you go.
Before we get started, do we have some amazing young people or what? You guys did a good job raising them. You should pat yourselves on the back. It's hard to follow that. That was incredible. And before we get started, I know Tanner's not expecting this. He's working hard right now, and he's taking photos. I wouldn't be here today without Tanner Lineberry. And Tanner, would you stand up for everybody? He's right here in the center.
Right, there you are, Tanner. Give him a shout out. He worked very closely with both of us.
Shout out, yes. He and I were at church on the same day, one day, a very long time ago. I think he said he was 11 years old. And my story made an impact on him. And I didn't know that so many years later, he would be sending me an email and saying, your story made an impact, and would you come speak? It just touched my heart, and I could not say no. And I'm just so grateful that you and I were there on the same day. You're an amazing, I'm going to call you a young man because I'm getting up there, but you're an amazing man, and I so appreciate your passion for this arena. And just thank you, Tanner. And if everyone could just give him a big hand because he's working hard this weekend.
Thank you, Tanner. And I'm going to start with quotes from you, from your website, and then throughout the talk, we'll give that website out and direct people where to go. And I do want to say this, guys. I'm not one to shy away from an interview at all, but I was glad to have the chance to meet with Sara to go over what we're going to talk about today. I'm a survivor of the 1992 federal siege at Ruby Ridge. I'm the oldest surviving daughter of Randy Weaver and Vicki Weaver. For many years, I struggled with grief and depression, burdened by the deaths of my mom, Vicki Weaver, and my little brother, Sam Weaver. This is my story. And Sara, you were born in Cedar Falls, Iowa. So Sara's the oldest daughter of Randy Weaver and Vicki Weaver, most recognized in association with, as everyone in this room is familiar with, the 1992 national tragedy, otherwise known as the federal siege at Ruby Ridge. You lost your mom and your younger brother, who, during the 11-day siege, you were just 16 years old at that time. As you most know, Sara was standing right next to her mom when her mom was shot in the head and killed by an FBI sniper. As a result, you have had to, and you're very open about this, you've overcome PTSD, depression, and you've handled incredibly intense media scrutiny over the years, and you've done it very well, I might add. And in the years following Ruby Ridge, Sara has had to deal, as I said, with all of this, wrestled with this internally. But today you bring a message of hope and forgiveness to share with the world, and we're going to get started right now. So, you know, I always, as we talked about how we wanted to start the conversation, I'd like you to just expand on that biography that I just read and what it means to you to be here to actually have this conversation today, and then we'll get started with some of what we had planned.
Yeah, I've been watching the speakers today, and the passion in this room is incredible. It reminded me of my dad. And my dad and I, we used to travel the country, and we would sell books at gun shows. We self-published our book, and There wasn't social media when Ruby Ridge happened. I never really felt like I had a voice. Everyone was telling my story, and so my dad and I would travel, and our goal was just to tell the story one person at a time, because everyone wanted to know. And he used to sign his book. This is a copy of his book, and if you have a copy of it, they're collector's items now. Freedom at any cost. And I struggled with that. Not because he was wrong, but because I knew the cost of freedom. And I didn't feel free in that at all. In after what had happened to my family, there was no freedom in it for me. It was a prison. It was a prison of pain and anger and bitterness and a whole slew of whys would hit me. I had to get down to the root of true freedom in order to keep going and in order to actually survive what happened to me. And so when we talk about forgiveness, it's incredibly important to me because I know the price behind it. And there is no price. I know the cost of freedom, and it's heavy.
We've heard people talk about the cost of freedom. Just the last 2-3 speakers have said that. The cost of freedom is not free, and we all know that. So what I want you to do is, if you could, walk us through the early stages that shaped, or your early experiences that shaped your views today, after everything that you went through, on gun rights.
Absolutely. So my dad was, you could call him, he was a gun lover. People would say, oh, well, yeah, Randy, he enjoys his guns. He would buy them. They were kind of like a savings account for him. He would buy them when he had some money, and then he would sell one when we needed groceries. So he wasn't obsessive about them. He just enjoyed them. So as children, we were around guns from a very early age. And the first thing my dad did with us, as soon as we could understand, was he taught us gun safety. They were a tool essential basically to our survival after we had moved from a suburban lifestyle in Iowa to a remote mountaintop in Idaho. There were real dangers. And my parents wanted to allow us to have a free childhood. I guess you would call it a feral childhood now. But they wanted to allow us to be able to roam the mountains and enjoy our childhood. And in order for them to have peace of mind for us to do that, we had to learn gun safety to be able to carry one. The emphasis that he placed on gun safety was so strong, we knew if we were ever caught messing around with it, that hell hath no fury like my dad catching us doing something stupid with a gun. So that just didn't happen. He could trust his children around his guns because he taught us early on gun safety. And I think that's so important. They were a tool essential to survival. They weren't something that we played with. They weren't something to be used frivolously. So he could trust his children around guns, and I think that's very, very important. So when I think of guns, I see them as a very important tool. I see them as something that is like any other tool that's dangerous, so to speak. So.
And you were how old? How old were you when your father began teaching you about guns and gun safety, both you and your brother and sister?
I would say he started us off with BB guns around 7 or 8 years old.
And there's the point. You and I talked about this yesterday. There were a lot of BB guns in your home.
There were 3 BB guns specifically when the siege took place, and they ended up making the famous pictures of all of Dad's guns spread out across the ground. So.
And I'm just curious, how many of them were? How many were there? Do you recall?
We had 3 BB guns.
Okay. Because we've seen that before, right, guys? Where the federal government throws and calls it an arsenal. And they fail to tell you that a lot of that is BB guns or non-working, or maybe even replicas. But they don't want to tell you that because they know that most masses don't understand that. So you were very young. You understood gun safety at a young age. And I guess when you look back at, because here this is where the script kind of flips to government. We'll flip it to government right now. When you look back, obviously there's government overreach involved here, and I think this is going to be a key part of the conversation. What lessons were learned? And it's such a broad-based question, I'm sorry, because there's so much going on with your family story. So to ask it this way, what do you see as key lessons about government overreach and the importance of Second Amendment protections after what your family went through? And as you look back in time, as you've gotten older, how do you reflect back on that?
Well, it changes all the time, just for a long time, it was very hard for me to even think about all of the things that went wrong, because as soon as I would go there in my memory, it was like touching the worst pain that I could ever experience in my life, and I couldn't go there for a long time. As I'm getting older, it's a little bit, I'm sticking my toe in that water a little bit more and a little bit more, because I see the need and the importance of telling the story. So there were several things that went wrong there that I believe we can learn from. The entrapment is a big one. The fact that my dad didn't have a $200 tax stamp, or it would have been legal to saw off the shotguns that they entrapped him to saw off. I think that was kind of a technicality or a gotcha type of law.
Let me stop you there. Let's talk about the entrapment for a minute.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are unaware of some of the detail and some of the nuance about how that entrapment occurred. I'm familiar with that because let's just say I boned up on my Ruby Ridge knowledge before sitting with you here today, and I found that aspect fascinating as well. Government lies involved in the entrapment. Can you give us specifics on that entrapment, what that actually entailed from your memory?
People befriending my family and pretending to be someone that they weren't. And so
Government agents.
Well, whether they were agents or they were actually informants, you could go either way with that. My dad called them, snitches, basically. That's how he saw them. And a lot of times they were snitches can be people that have gotten in trouble or broken the law in the past, and then, an agency will pay them for information, which then can that get into some muddy waters if you're paying a criminal to gather information? Is it accurate information you're getting? These are just questions that I myself personally have, after the fact. But my parents were very hurt by this when they realized that certain people had befriended them that had, ulterior motives that were not good.
I'm trying to find a way to phrase this question. When your dad found out, how long, the befriending process here, what was the time frame there? How long did this occur, under what time frame? Because I know from reading up about it, I want to hear it from you. These individuals befriended your father, government agents, whether informants. I would consider them government agents. That's just my own perspective because they were working on behalf of the government. They knew what they were doing, informing. And they led your father down certain paths that the government then later used to entrap your family with.
Yes. It was broadcasted across the world that my dad was, a white supremacist because he attended Aryan nations. And I don't think a lot of people understand it was an informant that first invited my dad to go with him to Aryan nations. And then that's where my dad met the man that ultimately talked him into sawing off 2 shotguns. The shotguns, had he had the $200 tax stamp, would have been legal, but he didn't because they caught him at a time when he wasn't working and he needed to buy groceries for his family, and they offered him twice the amount they were worth. And he initially had refused to do it, but they kept, upping the amount they would pay him to do it, so he agreed. So
they get him to do certain things. They lead him to certain places.
Yes.
They lead him to do certain things that they know is going to be used against him.
Yes. So entrapment.
That's entrapment to me, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
I don't know how you feel about that. To me, that's entrapment. No question about it. It's deceitful, and it wound up, as we know, in that horrible 11-day siege.
Yes.
That led us right to where you are today, to this stage right here today, to talk about this?
Yeah, my dad would admit, he's like, I never should have done that. I never should have sawed the guns off. And if I could go back and change it, I would. And ultimately, that decision to saw off those 2 guns that he was convinced to do destroyed his life. My dad died of a broken heart. I mean, I watched him suffer after this immensely. And it's one of the most heartbreaking parts of the story for me was watching him suffer, because he suffered. And I had to get to the root of all of it, which is where my faith story comes in, and then forgiveness comes in later. But watching him suffer was heartbreaking.
How did faith play in your dad's life later on in life?
Later on in life, he got very angry at God. He would call himself an atheist, and I used to laugh, and I'd say, Dad, you can't be mad at God if there isn't one.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's a great point.
You know, I think he started off, he and my mom in Iowa, as just what you would call baby, on fire Christian believers, and it just one series of like hurts after another, starting with the church and then, you know, people, and all of that just kept, you know, sort of building up and got the ball rolling. And you have to deal with that kind of stuff. You can't just try and, you know, push it away and not deal with it with God. So.
And you and your father, I'm going to assume that you and your father remained very close throughout the years.
I tried to be as close as I could with him. He was hurt. He was very, very hurt, and I know he loved me fiercely. He loved his kids fiercely. Sometimes it's hard to love a very hurt person because they end up, you know, they'll lash out of their hurt, and I never, you know, blamed him for that, but we were very close. I mean, we traveled and we did book signings, and I was a daddy's girl through and through. I just loved him, and I really I suffered with him because I didn't want him to continue to blame himself and live in that type of suffering. Yeah. Because what he suffered, his punishment did not fit his crime.
Sounds like you were a tremendous help to your dad. So I'm hopeful that he found peace.
He's at peace now, and that gives me peace.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just from some of the legal aspects of this, I think it's important for those people. How many people in the room remember Ruby Ridge standoff in '92? Most of us do, right? Time goes by, and we forget some of the details. But the legal aftermath of what happened, your father was put on trial and was acquitted.
Yes. He was found guilty of failure to appear. Mm-hmm. So he's
Which, by the way, I want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, many of you might not know this, but it was because the original court date that started all of this, that led to the bench warrant, was because of a mistake on a court date that was sent to Mr. Weaver. Correct me if I'm wrong on the dates. It was the original court date was for March 30th, but the information that your dad got was before that, mistakenly sent by an attorney. So they agreed to hold the bench warrant open to see if your father showed up. It was an absolute mistake.
So there were 2 mistakes, and his initial arrest, and again, they played on how they knew my parents would react. The initial arrest, my parents were headed to town, and the agents had set up a truck on the side of the road, and like a broke down couple. So the hood was up, and my dad and my mom thought they were stopping to help someone who had a broken down vehicle, and then all agents poured out of the back and freeze Randy, threw my mom in the snow, threw my dad in the snow. They confiscated my mom's pistol, and they took my dad to jail, and they told him that he needed to put up bond to get out. And so the bond, I believe, was around $10,000 or something like that. So he put up our home as bond, and they mistakenly told him, if you lose your case, you will lose your bond, which was our home. And so mom and dad came home with that heaviness and that, how could we not lose our case? Like, they entrapped me, they have me doing this, they have me selling these guns to this agent, so how could we not lose our case? We're gonna be homeless over this. So then they did end up setting a court date, and I believe it was February 20th, and they sent him a letter saying it was in March or something to that nature. I don't remember specifics, but when he didn't show up, that's when they issued a warrant for his arrest.
And then they decided to find out whether or not he would show up when the judge realized there was a mistake made. And by that time, it was too late anyway, and the judge refused to remove the bench warrant. And then therein lies basically the beginning of the saga, right?
It's just one terrible thing after another. I mean, yeah.
All right, so time is going to get away from us, so we have the setup there. Obviously, you grew up understanding firearms, you understand the right to bear arms. Over the years, has that changed? Has your view on the right to bear arms changed? When we see some of the political violence that's occurring today, all of the nasty things that are happening, when we see school shootings, et cetera, how has that, in your eyes, as years have progressed and you look back, has that changed for the positive or the negative?
Well, you could say that, and like I shared with you, I'm not an activist per se, but I am a supporter through and through of the Second Amendment. And in our case, I believe the fact that I was holding my own rifle is the reason I'm still alive. I believe it was a deterrent. And, you know, I told you earlier I wasn't going to sit down with you because Mossad stole my line. I was praying about
She was kidding, by the way. She scared me to death a few minutes ago, I'll tell you that.
I was praying about this talk earlier today, and what God placed on my heart was the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. And then I have been in Luke chapter 22, and Jesus saying, sell your cloak and buy a sword. He told his disciples that. He knew, and it's like, how do you reconcile that, right? Like, how do you reconcile those two things together? Thou shalt not murder, sell your cloak and buy a sword. Like, Jesus wasn't telling his disciples to go out and hurt people. Quite the opposite. But he also wasn't telling them to buy a sword to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You know, he told them that because he knew the opposition and the evil they would face on their journey, I believe, and that sword would be a deterrent to that.
A God-given right.
A God-given right. And
That's how we get there.
When Mossad spoke that earlier today, it was confirmation for me, like, that you're on the right track.
That's
here.
when you decided to mess with my head.
That's when I decided to mess with you just a little bit. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So that leads to what role you see as far as educating the public.
Absolutely.
What's the role, that engagement in building stronger support for our Second Amendment rights as we've kind of just come full circle here, and then I want to talk a little bit about faith with you because some very powerful words. So
I don't believe a lot of people understand that. So I was a victim of gun violence, but I'm a gun supporter. How do you reconcile those things? And I don't believe a lot of people understand that you can support the Second Amendment and condemn gun violence. Like, we can do that. You don't have to be one extreme or the other, and we should do that. We should condemn gun violence. Just like you can own and operate a car and condemn drunk driving.
Right.
And that goes back to the tool that I believe that guns are, that cars are, that chainsaws are. If you go back to the first murder in the Bible, you know, it was Cain with a rock. Are we going to ban the rocks? I mean, how
you see how this argument is unfolding, ladies and gentlemen? Right before your eyes? And I mention that, Sarah, because we hear on our side of the fence here many times, everybody in this room knows it because you've likely used the argument, we don't sue Ford because of the actions of a drunk driver. We don't ban rocks because of the actions of a criminal who used a rock, as you just mentioned biblically. We don't ban knives because a criminal used a knife. And that's how you circle back to how we reconcile this.
Absolutely.
And that's a very powerful message. Now, recently you had, and I found this fascinating because I was unaware of this until about 5:30 this morning when I was reading this, but you had an opportunity, unbeknownst to you, to be on a panel with Mrs. Kernodle, who is the mother of Xana Kernodle, who was murdered in Idaho. And she found her ability to forgive that set her free. Now, let's get into the forgiveness, because this goes back to what happened just recently here in the state of Utah with Charlie Kirk, and these are very powerful messages.
Wow, yeah.
So take it away.
Wow. That's, so Kara, I had the privilege of meeting in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
The mother of Xana Kernodle, Kara Kernodle.
Yes. And her daughter's life was taken brutally while she was at college. It was the Brian Koberger case in Idaho. If you hadn't heard of it, you can look that up online. It's been everywhere. And I had the privilege of meeting her. Funny enough, an old friend of my parents goes to the same church as her. And that's how we got connected to be able to do.
It's not coincidence.
It's not. It's another finger. I like to say it's another God print on my life. But she's an incredible woman. The thing that struck me about her was her strength. And I asked her, I'm like, how are you so strong? And she smiled at me, and with a twinkle in her eyes, she said, Jesus. And I just knew, I knew what she was talking about. You know, I knew in that moment. She's the real deal. She did an interview for CBN, and I encourage you to look up that interview and watch it. She's the real deal with forgiveness, and she's going to be a powerhouse for the Lord. I can see it all over her. It was such a privilege to meet her.
You two bonded, and you know, when I hear all of this, and again, there are two biblical passages that we're going to read that are very important.
Yes, absolutely.
I think, but we'll close out with that. From a rights standpoint, after everything your family has been through, what is your number one message for those of us in the room and those of us fighting for gun rights, including the politicians who are here, that are facing a political enemy that wants to destroy that right, to leave us defenseless in the face of what you and I both know? As I say on my show many times, I don't think a show goes by that I don't remind my listeners that evil is real. We have a right to defend ourselves from it. What's your message to the politicians, to those of us on this side?
Well, I have to go back to what you said, because you mentioned Charlie Kirk, right. And he's another young man that he had a huge impact on my life, as he did millions of us, but I'd hoped to meet him this side of heaven, and that didn't happen. But the trauma of watching what happened to him is very real for me. It took me back, and I know that is real for a lot of people. And I know you want to go into faith in a little bit. You wanted to know what my number one message was, but I had to also, speak with my son about all of this. He
had a lot of interesting things to say. Can you kind of surmise some of that for us?
Yeah, my son is 24 now, and he's a law enforcement professional. And I asked him right after we lost Charlie his thoughts on everything. And I think it's important we get our young people's perspective. They have a lot to say, and we should listen, and we should hand them the microphone. So my son, and I got his permission to share, but I said, how do you feel, about this as a law enforcement professional? And he said, Mom, I agree with Charlie. He said, we hand 14-year-old children keys to a car. And he said, that's a privilege, that's not a right. And I just thought that was so profound. He also said he's not worried about law-abiding citizens with firearms. He's worried about the criminals, because they will always find a way to get firearms illegally or however. And he also is just, I just have to say how proud I am of him. He's already gotten an award for helping to save someone's life. And our young people are just facing a lot right now. And I just hope somehow, as Gen X, that we can just continue to help them on this journey, because they have a big mission ahead of them.
My kids are a couple years younger than your son, same Gen X thing, and I've been, I don't want to say shocked, because I've raised two great kids that believe in our right to bear arms, that would hopefully one day want to speak here.
Yeah.
And they will be able to do that. And your son also had some thoughts about repealing of the National Firearms Act, the NFA, and all kinds of things. It's proof positive that the younger generation, folks, is not lost.
They're not.
They're not. They don't get the press coverage on this subject that they should. And it saddens me. But I know that they believe it. When I was at the Gun Owners of America convention just a few months back, I had an opportunity to meet with a lot of young college kids that were there for Rush Week. And I can't say I was shocked it was Tennessee, but every single young person I spoke to that were rushing these sororities were all pro-gun advocates. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And your son, the same way, my kids, the same way. And regarding Charlie, I do want to point this out because it does give us hope. If my family is any indication, then the Turning Point Freedom Festival in Phoenix this year will be double in size from what it was when my daughter and my niece attended, because we're doubling our engagement with now my son and my nephew, along with my daughter and my niece. So if that's any indication across the country, that's going to be a massive event. Encourage our kids to continue the fight for the right to bear arms. Encourage our kids to pick up where we left off. That's an important message. Obviously, your family is doing that as well. And faith comes into play now. Let's kind of go there because we look around at what's happening around the world today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think teaching our kids the sanctity of life again is very important.
Yeah.
I think we've lost that in video games and movies and, this alternate reality that we have in our hands every day that's not real, but that is influencing very real decisions every day.
I believe I have my own personal thoughts on that, but I believe it's destroying a lot of the psyche of the nation. And it's allowing a lot of hatred and a lot of evil to come out because people can hide behind this and their real true comes out. And I don't see, I guess the genie's out of the bottle.
Yes.
I don't know how we get it back other than having faith that we can get it back, I think is really important.
Yes, and that life is precious. It's precious to the Lord. I mean, you can't, once it's gone, you can't get it back. It's yeah.
Yeah, I believe me, I know.
I'd give anything to hug my little brother again. I'd give anything to pick my mom's brain again. Life is precious, and when it's gone, it's gone. And yeah, we can move on with our lives. We can choose to forgive. We can inspire people. But life is precious, and when it's gone, it is gone. I have raised my son without his grandmother and his uncle, and I didn't have my mom when I was pregnant to help me. And I almost took my own life because I didn't have support from my family. And so I had to get to that place. Leaving my son motherless was not an option. So when I say I had to get to the nitty-gritty of true freedom, that's where I found it, was in Jesus.
That leads me to John 3:16.
Yes.
And
My favorite verse.
for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, so whoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Most people don't know John 3:17. We hear 3:16 all the time. 3:17.
For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it, but so that through him the world might be saved.
And ladies and gentlemen, how do you save the world? Faith, education, the truth. That's how we do it. We fight for our rights. We fight for our freedoms. We don't give up, ever. And I'll let you have the final word there.
We keep our eyes on Jesus and eternity. I know I'm going to see them again one day, and I'm so thankful for that.
You will. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Weaver.
Thank you.